On the next episode of Painting and Travel, we'll visit downtown Ketchikan, Alaska, then cruise to Glacier National Bay Park for glacier viewing. Roger will paint a well-used commercial fishing vessel with oils on canvas.
Early morning misty clouds greet us while we cruise into port in Ketchikan, Alaska, where Roger immediately spots the subject for his next painting, a well-used commercial fishing tender. I learned that a tender works the fishing grounds by taking on the commercial boat's catches and then brings the fish to town to the local cannery for processing, allowing the commercial boats to stay out longer, making the best use of their fuel and their time. The marina is full of boats, commercial as well as pleasure and sport boats for hire. People come from all over the world here to fish. It's that good. We'll leave the cruise ship for a few hours and walk around downtown among the dense tourist attractions, shopping opportunities, and restaurants serving fresh fish and king crab dinners. After satisfying the need to see colorful shops, we are ready to get back on board and return to the natural sights, leaving the harbor of the salmon capital of the world behind as we head for Glacier Bay.
I'll be working on a 24 by 30 inch linen canvas today, and I'll be working with oils. And I took this photograph when we were coming into Ketchikan, and it was early morning, a bit rainy, a little foggy, and the sun had just come up. But I liked the photograph because it just had an interesting mood to it. Now in conditions like this, detail just does not come forward. So when I do this painting, all the areas in this background will be sort of in soft focus. There won't be a lot of detail. That way, hopefully I can capture that mood, that misty early morning look. On my palette, I have titanium white, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue. Then I have these earth colors, yellow ochre, burnt umber, raw sienna, and burnt sienna. Over here I have some sap green. And I have added black to my palette as well. Probably won't be using much of the green, but there is some in the background right in here. Now I've toned my canvas with some cerulean blue. I used acrylics to do that, and I can put the oils over the acrylics, but of course you can't put the acrylics over the oils. So this is acrylic, that's dry, and I'm going to put the oils over it. I generally like to start with the darker passages on a painting, so I think I'll begin with the background. Right up in here. The other thing about this particular subject here is that there is just not very much color in it, and there are no real passages of light either. I mean, there's some reflections down here and so on, but basically this is a very sort of a dull look. And of course, when there's not very much light, the eye just cannot see the colors as well either. So that's what really influences this painting quite a bit, is the lack of color. We'll put just enough color in there in order to make it interesting, but I don't want to overdo the color. Probably the most intense color on this painting is the hull of the ship. I'll use ultramarine blue and white. I'm applying the paint in rather a dry manner. I don't want to get the paint really wet with much thinner on here, because then it would stay wet for a longer time and I wouldn't be able to go over this quite as easily. So I'm applying it thin but rather dry. And I have the reflection down here. Now when I have a large shape like this up here, I want to keep that large shape as one large shape. I don't want to go in and break it up very much. So I can put subtle differences within that large shape, but I don't want to lose that large shape as a whole, because that's really, these large shapes are what make up the painting. If I have too many small little spotty shapes, painting gets confusing and it loses a lot of its strength. Let's put in the water now. You can see how this blue that I put on earlier as a base coat, it really helps to establish things more quickly than had this canvas just been white. It's important to use enough paint, especially on an oil painting. If the paint is too thin, it just will look weak. And that's especially true when you're working on canvas, not so much when working on a masonite board. Well, I really thought I would have to add some more colors to this blue, but it seems like ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and white are going to do the job. I often add a third color to that, but in this case, it doesn't seem like I need to. And I say that because often when I mix one color with white, say ultramarine blue and white, it just looks like ultramarine blue on a painting, and people can tell that. They know the difference between, some nice subtle colors and colors that come right out of the tube. I'll keep this background very soft, in soft focus, to give that a foggy look. I need to start refining these areas. It's not all covered yet, but pretty much. Then I will know whether I need to make parts of it's lighter, some parts of it's darker, and so on. Until I get everything covered, it's really hard to determine that. I don't even know what some of these things are back here, so I'm not looking at them as objects so much as I am just looking at them as shapes. I'm going to move over here, and there's some more green here, but it's a very gray green. Just a touch of green in there, and some black. I often hesitate to use black, but I'm not afraid to use it either. It really depends on the circumstance. But one thing I do is I use black to make things grayer, not necessarily to make things darker. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I'm going to pick up a slightly smaller brush now, and I'll put in some of the work here on the cabin here of the ship. There's really a lot of detail going on, especially towards the stern of this ship. So when I look at it, I have to keep thinking to myself over and over, how do I simplify this? And one way to do that is, of course, using a large brush. That just sort of naturally helps in the process. I thought I would use these earth colors a lot more than I have, but really I haven't even touched them. Maybe we'll get into those in a little while for some of these areas up here where there's some color. Right here we have a very, very dark stripe on the bottom of the ship. I think that's probably the darkest area we're going to put in this painting. So I'm going to use my burnt sienna, some ultramarine blue. Now you see, if I had the paint really thin, this paint that I just put on here would have mixed a whole lot with the paint underneath. But since this was put on with kind of a dry brush, I'm able to paint over this and not have too much of that mix with the paint underneath. Now we have the anchor right here, and I'm not going to draw the anchor very much. I'm just going to indicate this space where the anchor is. Because as I said earlier, this is sort of an early morning thing. And when it's dark like this, kind of foggy and hazy, the eye will just not really pick up on all the detail that you might see on a bright day. Now, since that's really the darkest part of my painting, with the exception of maybe the masts or a few things like that, I want to be careful not to get anything else in the painting this dark. So nothing up here in this area will come close to being that dark. Now, when choosing colors to put on a palette, I try and think ahead. What do I need to use? And often it's difficult. I really thought I was going to use these colors quite a bit. But as it turns out, I'm not. They will come in handy later, but I don't need them nearly as much as I thought. Well, I think we've got a pretty good start on this painting, so I'm going to take a break now and let's go and join Sarah.
There's a feeling of reverence on the deck as we cruise through the inside passage towards Glacier National Bay. This land of Alaska is huge and spectacular and makes me feel tiny and insignificant by comparison. It's refreshing not to see any buildings, billboards, electric lines, or no trespassing signs. Instead, I'm invited to look and listen and think my own thoughts for a while and feel the space I'm visiting for the first time. Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve is part of a 25 million acre World Heritage Site. The park is comprised of over 3 million acres of mountains, glaciers, forests, and waterways. And only 250 years ago, Glacier Bay was all glacier and no bay. It was a massive river of ice, roughly 100 miles long and thousands of feet deep, occupying the entire bay. The water is calm and my fellow passengers are quietly engaged in watching the scenery while we float along through the heavy mist, spotting a distant waterfall or perhaps a few mountain goats if you have binoculars. Weather changes quickly here, and we glide through a few light showers and just enough clouds to make a very dreamlike atmosphere before we ease into the glacier field. The ship's captain does his best to set the mood for glacier viewing. He slowly rotates the ship, and then you and everyone else on board, no matter where they're watching from, seems to get an equal chance at the primary goal, to witness the glacier calving, thus producing a large chunk of ice that crashes into the water. The dirty-looking line in the glacier is just that, rocks and bits of ground that have been picked up by the glacier as it moves ever so gradually down the mountain towards the water. The wonderful light aqua color in the glacier comes from algae, and the constantly changing shape makes it seem like a living sculpture, interesting and unpredictable.
I'm putting a hint of a road in here. I don't see it in my photograph, but I just want to add some interesting shapes here and there in the background without destroying the whole background area. And I've added some different textures and colors back here, and I've been careful to keep these very, very soft. I don't want anything to jump out because that's sort of a rainy, foggy look. If I add too much detail, I'm going to lose that feeling. So now I'm just adding some small strokes, just enough to define some of the detail without really describing it very much. You've got this other ship right here. I'll add a few little details to it. It's almost barely recognizable as a ship. I'm working with shapes, not necessarily objects. And right up here, there's some posts or masts. I'm not sure what all these are, but I'm glad they're there because they give me an excuse to add more reflections down here. All right, just keep going right underneath these. I want to go down right below it. And a dark area like right here. I can bring this dark area down. I wipe my brush off. And then I can drag my other colors, my other values this way, back and forth. Same way here. This is wet paint. So I can take my brush, just drag it right through those reflections. Light spot right here. Just bring it down in the water. Put another one right beside it, maybe a tall one. Just bring that down. I'm mixing some dark color now with some black, blue, and burnt sienna. And we have a couple of masts here from this ship. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'll keep my hand on this side of the ruler and my brush right here, and I'll just drag that straight line down onto the ship. I can barely see my pencil line, but I can see it just enough. Here we go. Yeah, that gives me a nice straight line. It goes right down here and sort of disappears into the hull. And there's a large blue mast right here. And there's some structure right on top of this mast. Just suggest a little of that. And that line goes right back here. There we go. Some of these masts and booms and so on get smaller. So I'm taking a smaller brush now. And we've got another one that goes right here, right up to the top. Right down to there we go. And the other one. I can also use this little 18-inch ruler to steady my hand. I can just set it anywhere on the canvas, and just the tip of that isn't going to really do anything to the paint there very much. So I can use that to steady my hand as I straighten out some of these lines. Pick up some light color. Really, this is all about the detail right now. You see, I'm able to put this paint over this wet paint simply because this was put on rather dry. Well, we've hardly used any color at all in this painting, but we have some large bumpers. So I'll take some yellow ochre and burnt sienna, and we have these large bumpers right here. That'll add some color to the painting. Get those the right shape. Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's only 4 there. Right here we have a door. I'll put that right there. I also see some rust coming down right on the side here of the ship. Right here. Just use the side of my brush for that. And maybe to add some character, I'll just put a few more touches of rust here and there. I'm going to put a few more colors out on my palette. I've got an orange, an alizarin crimson, and a cadmium yellow. Now I knew these were going to be accent colors. That's why I didn't put them out right away. But these bumpers up here, they look kind of orange. Touch right in there. That'd give a nice accent to it. And this black stripe down here on the bottom of the ship, that is really a red color, so can't see it very much, but I'm going to add some alizarin crimson to that. It's blending with that other dark color, but that's all right. It just gives it that little bit of a warmth. And right above that, there's a white stripe. Okay, I think I'll start maybe back here, barely touching the brush to the canvas. Oh, it's getting too thick. Well, that's okay. I know how to fix that easily enough. It's really too thick there, so I'll just take my larger brush. I'll just drag it along underneath that and cut the size of that down. See, I'm just taking that darker color underneath. And that should do it. Okay. These areas that I've touched with my ruler, just take those with this clean brush, just blend them right out. All right, let's work on this water down here some more. I'll mix up that color again, mostly ultramarine blue and white, touch of black. All right, now let's refine some of these patterns in the water. Now there's some large lights on this ship, and they were still lit. I think I want the bow of this ship a little more intense, and that'll feel like it sort of has that curve to it. This area is slightly darker, so it's sort of curving around to the front. And I think a bit more intense blue down in the water. These are very subtle shifts right now. But sometimes it's those little things that can make a difference in a painting. I'll take my burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and let's add some more reflection of this part, this dark part here. I want to make that slightly softer. I don't want the hard edge. I want the hard edge on top, but not on the bottom. I want the hard edge up here, but not down here. Okay, just back and forth, soften that. Okay. Now this is a large area right here that has nothing going on in it. So I think, even though it's not reflected in my photograph, I'm going to take some lighter blue and just lighten this somewhat, just to change the look of that. So that area is just not so large with absolutely nothing happening in there. And this is a real important part of the painting right here. So light against dark will sort of bring attention to that area. So this is dark, and I'll put that lighter color of the water right up against the bow of the ship. That makes a nice edge right there, a nice descriptive edge. All right, with my small brush, we have the name of the ship. I'm just going to put some letters on here that look like letters, but really aren't. And I think those will be reflected right down here in the water. This is a brush here that I seldom use. I'm going to use it today. It's a liner. So I'm going to take my white. This brush just flops all around, but it's will be good for putting in some of this rigging on the ship. And it doesn't appear that we have very much rigging, but just in a stroke or two, I can pull these lines down in here. That makes real easy work of that. Another one here. And to finish the painting, I'm going to put those yellow lights in that are reflecting in the water. This is sort of the payoff for all the other work that's been done here. So I'll mix this with some cadmium yellow, some orange, and a bit of yellow ochre. And we have a light right here. Now I can't see that light all that much, but in the water, it's making this very interesting reflection. So I want to be sure this goes right below the light. Starts there, so right there, okay. And just with a few easy strokes, I'm loading my brush up so the paint doesn't mix with the paint underneath. I'll mix some more of that. Orange, yellow, and yellow ochre. And there's another light right over here. I want to be sure I get this right under the light, so this just helps me kind of measure that. Laying this paint on rather thick. And I'll pick up my yardstick. We have a few lights way over here. And that reflection starts right about here. Another one right here. Load that brush up again. And we have a third light here. Bring that down. Now, after having put this on, I see that this reflection lines up with this anchor here. And I just don't like the way that line sort of continues on down there. So I'm going to take it out and change it. And that's really not that much of a problem. I'll take a clean brush and I'll just try and pick these areas up. The brush, wipe my brush off like that. Maybe just take a little tip of this rag here, wipe that out. Now that, I could say that's bad planning, but just know that those things happen, and when they do, it really doesn't take very much to repair them, either with oils or acrylics. And in a minute or two, it will be good as new. All right, let's pick up on that again. I'll get my yellow, and let's move the light over maybe this way. Put that light right there. And I think I'm going to like that better for a couple of reasons. And one reason is the spacing here is unequal, so that makes it a bit more interesting than having 3 equal spaced lights. And put another one right down here. And here again, I'll try and keep these sort of unevenly spaced. And I'm going to add one more right back here, just to balance things off. Well, I think that's going to finish this painting from our trip to Ketchikan, Alaska.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.